All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You know we love to take your sources and really see what's going on, dive deep, get into the nitty-gritty. And folks, let me tell you, today's deep dive, well, this one's got some real spice to it.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah, big time. We're talking about a political backlash, and I'm talking the kind that shakes things up in Washington, the kind that makes those marble statues sweat a little bit.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I was right. Picture this. Republican lawmakers, even those safe and sound in their conservative districts, they're getting an earful from their voters. We're talking packed town halls, really angry voters, accusations of, well, betrayal. It's not exactly the honeymoon phase you'd expect for a brand new administration, is it?
Not exactly a honeymoon, no. Sounds more like they booked a one-way ticket straight to Splitsville political style.
Okay, maybe not quite that dramatic, but you get the picture. What's really got us hooked here is where this backlash is coming from and who it's aimed at. Some usual suspects. Sure, there's some anger directed at President Trump, of course. But there's this other figure, a tech billionaire you might not expect, right in the crosshairs.
Ooh, now you've got me curious.
Gotta keep you guessing for a bit, right? Build a little suspense. Now, you're probably wondering what's got these voters so riled up, right? Well, strap in, because we're diving headfirst into a world of budget cuts, controversial appointments, and some serious anxiety about the future of, well, everything. Social Security, school lunches, you name it. But don't worry, our expert here is going to help us unpack it all, connect those dots.
Lay it on me. I'm ready to decipher the code.
Okay, let's start with what we're calling the town hall from hell. Picture this. Representative Rich McCormick, Republican, representing Roswell, Georgia, decides to hold a town hall meeting.
Bold move.
Bold indeed. And let's just say it did not go as planned. We're talking boos, jeers, shouts of, you're doing us a disservice. You know those viral videos, politicians getting grilled by their constituents?
Ooh, yeah. Those are entertaining, to say the least.
This one was textbook.
Wow. So why does this one stand out? What makes this town hall the Hall of Fame of disastrous town halls?
Okay, so to get why this particular town hall is such a big deal, we got to remember who Representative McCormick is.
Right. Fill me in.
So he's a former DeSantis supporter, right? Switched over to Team Trump, won a traditionally Republican district back in 22, and now he's seen as a potential challenger to Senator Ossoff in 26. So, for him to be facing this level of, hostility from his own voters, it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's not a good sign for any politician, especially one with higher aspirations.
You got that right. And it wasn't just the angry vibe in the room, It was the specifics, the things folks were fired up about.
I bet. What were some of the hot button issues?
Oh, well, McCormick made this comment about teens on school lunch programs, saying they should work to pay for their meals.
Ooh, that's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, and then there was the whole thing about the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. McCormick defended the recent layoffs there by saying they were duplicitous with AI.
Duplicitous with AI? What does that even mean?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure either, but it seems like some GOP lawmakers are trying to frame these cuts as like a modernization effort, as if artificial intelligence can just, step in for public health experts.
Right, like we can just replace doctors and nurses with algorithms.
Yeah.
But, when people are losing their jobs, when you see the direct impact on essential services, that kind of messaging doesn't really land, does it?
Nope, not really. And that's not even the worst of it. Remember that whole comparing the crowd to January 6ers thing?
Oh, yeah, that didn't go over well, did it?
Not at all. And I think it really highlights this growing gap between some GOP lawmakers and the folks they're supposed to be representing. They're pushing these policies that are deeply unpopular, and they just can't seem to explain why these changes are necessary or even beneficial.
So a disconnect between the representatives and the represented.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. It's not just happening in Georgia. It's nationwide. Our sources are telling us Representative Pete Sessions is facing some tough questions down in Texas. Representative Scott Fitzgerald is getting grilled in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got protests outside Representative Mike Lawler's office in New York. It seems like, everywhere you look, Republican lawmakers are feeling the heat.
Wow, so this discontent, it's really bubbling up all over the country.
Oh, yeah. And get this, it's not just Democrats who are angry. We're seeing a lot of, traditionally Republican voters expressing their concerns, too.
Now, that's interesting. So it's not just the usual partisan divide.
Definitely not. Like, there's a story about a retired Army officer. He confronted Representative Stephanie Bice in Oklahoma about veterans' benefits being cut.
Oh, wow.
You could just hear the emotion in his voice, the feeling of betrayal. Like, I put my life on the line for this country, and this is how you treat me. It was powerful stuff.
That's a powerful reminder that these budget cuts, they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet, are they?
Yeah.
They have real-world consequences. They affect real people's lives.
Absolutely. And this anger, it kind of reminds me of the Tea Party movement back in '09.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, I think both movements are rooted in this sense of economic anxiety, a real distrust of the government.
Right, I can see that.
But this time, there's a twist.
A twist. To tell.
This time, some Republicans, they're uncomfortable, too.
Uncomfortable.
The speed, the style of these changes, they're worried about the impact on their voters, and they're questioning if this is the right way to go about things.
So it's not just a simple Democrat versus Republican issue anymore. It's more nuanced than that.
It really seems that way. And it all leads back to one very powerful and very controversial figure. Remember that tech billionaire we mentioned?
Oh, yeah. The one pulling the strings from behind the curtain?
That's the one. I can't keep it a secret any longer. We're talking about Elon Musk.
Finally.
Yeah.
The mystery's revealed.
Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, he's right at the center of this voter fury. And it's not just because of his, let's say, unique personality. He actually has a very direct role in the government right now. He's head of DOGE.
DOGE. Like the meme.
Well, kinda. It stands for the Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty powerful position. Why is he in charge of that?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. See, usually you'd expect this anger to be directed at the elected officials, the folks people actually voted for. But here you have this, unelected individual appointed by the president, suddenly in charge of these government agencies.
Yeah, that's kind of unusual, isn't it? I don't know whether people are a little freaked out.
And the way DOGE is operating, our sources describe it as a chainsaw approach. They're talking mass layoffs, agencies being shut down, and a real lack of transparency.
Chainsaw approach, that sounds intense.
It is. It's like someone just took a giant axe to the federal government, and folks, they're not happy about it.
I can imagine. So what are people specifically worried about?
Well, they're worried about Musk's power, right? His access to data, this perception that he's calling the shots, not their elected representatives. It's like they're saying, hold on, we didn't vote for Elon Musk. Why is he making decisions about our lives?
It's a valid question, especially with this newly passed House budget. $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. But get this, $2 billion in unspecified spending cuts.
That's a lot of cuts, and pretty vague, too.
Vague is right. And when you have Senator Chris Murphy warning about the potential impact of $880 billion in Medicaid cuts, well, that's not exactly reassuring. We're talking sick kids losing access to health care, hospitals closing, addiction treatment centers disappearing.
It's a scary thought. And this whole situation, it's really putting the GOP in a tough spot. On one hand, they campaigned on smaller government fiscal responsibility.
Right, so they have to deliver on those promises.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they're facing this massive backlash, and not just from Democrats, but from their own base, too.
Oh, so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to keep their promises without completely alienating their voters. That's got to be tricky.
You got that right.
Yeah.
And you want to know what their brilliant strategy is?
Let me guess. More tax cuts.
Nope. Even better. They're advising lawmakers to wait for it.
Yeah.
Stop holding town halls.
Seriously, they're just going to avoid the problem altogether.
That's the plan. Avoid those viral moments. Stay out of the public eye. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Wow. It's something else.
Yeah.
But is that really a smart move? Or are they just digging themselves a deeper hole by refusing to engage?
Well, that's what we're here to figure out, right? It's like they're afraid to face the music, Isn't part of their job to actually listen to the people they represent, to answer those tough questions.
It is. And this whole avoidance tactic, it really raises some red flags about transparency and accountability. If lawmakers are too afraid to engage with the people who elected them, it kind of undermines the whole point of a representative democracy, doesn't it?
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a second. Maybe, just maybe, the GOP leadership is thinking, look, we made promises during the campaign, we have to deliver, and sometimes that means making tough choices, the kind of choices that aren't going to win any popularity contests. What do you think?
There's definitely some logic to that. Governing, it often means making tough calls, and yeah, sometimes those calls come with a political price tag. But the key is how you communicate those decisions to the public, how you explain those choices. If it comes across as heartless, If it seems like you're prioritizing tax cuts for the wealthy over essential services that everyone needs, well, that's going to backfire. And it seems like, well, that's exactly what's happening.
It's all about perception, isn't it? And right now, the perception is that the GOP is, well, out of touch with the needs of everyday people. They're seen as prioritizing corporate interests, the wealthy elite, while cutting programs that benefit the most vulnerable in society. And having Elon Musk, a billionaire who's known for, well, let's just say his unique approach, leading the charge on government efficiency, that's not exactly helping their image.
It's definitely adding fuel to the fire. Musk, he's a brilliant entrepreneur, no doubt about it. But he also has this reputation for being impulsive, unpredictable, maybe even a little reckless. And those qualities, they might be celebrated in Silicon Valley, but they don't necessarily translate well to governing.
It's like they're trying to run the government like one of his companies, And that's not exactly reassuring to people who rely on those government services. Imagine if your local fire department was suddenly run by someone who is known for making decisions on a whim, without consulting the experts or considering the consequences. You'd be a little worried, right?
I think most people would be. And that's the core of the problem here, isn't it? The GOP, they're trying to sell this idea of radical change, of disrupting the status quo, but they're not doing a great job of explaining why these changes are necessary or how they'll actually benefit the average person.
And to be fair, there are legitimate concerns about government waste, about inefficiency. I think most people would agree that things could be done better. But the way the GOP is going about it, it just seems to be creating more chaos and uncertainty.
It is, and it's creating this rift within the party itself. Remember we were talking about some Republicans being uncomfortable with the speed and style of these changes. Well, that discomfort, it's starting to manifest in some interesting ways.
Oh, like what?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
We're starting to see some pushback, some dissent from within the GOP ranks. Take Representative McCormick, for example. Remember that disastrous town hall we talked about? Well, despite that, he's actually been urging a more cautious approach, giving people time to adjust to these changes. And then there's Representative Cliff Bentz from Oregon. He's been pretty vocal about the need for DOGE, that Department of Government Efficiency, to actually loop in Congress, before making these huge decisions. They're basically saying, hey, we're on board with streamlining government, but let's do it in a way that's transparent, accountable, and doesn't completely alienate the people we represent.
So there's a crack in the facade. Some Republicans are starting to break from the party line.
It certainly seems that way. And it'll be interesting to see how the GOP leadership responds to this dissent. Will they listen to these voices of caution, or will they just double down on their current strategy?
Because, let's be real, avoiding town halls and silencing dissent, that's not exactly a long-term solution, is it?
It's not. And it raises some serious questions about the future of the GOP. Can they balance their desire for radical change with empathy, with being responsive to the needs of their voters? Can they bridge the gap between what they say and how they actually govern?
Those are big questions. And as we've been talking, I keep thinking about this idea of disillusionment. It seems like a lot of people, voters and lawmakers alike, they're disillusioned with the way things are. They're disillusioned with the political system, they're disillusioned with the GOP, and they're disillusioned with where the country is heading.
I think you're right. There's a sense of unease, of anxiety about the future. And that unease is fueling this backlash.
And it's not just about politics, It's about fairness. It's about feeling like the system is rigged against the average person. This idea that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you contribute, you're just one paycheck away from disaster. And then you see these massive tax cuts for corporations, for the wealthy, while programs that help working families are being slashed. It's no wonder people are angry.
It's a breeding ground for resentment, for instability. And it's something the GOP has to address. They have to, if they want to avoid a major political realignment.
A political realignment? What do you mean?
Imagine the political landscape like a tectonic plate. For decades, it's been relatively stable. You have the two major parties, Democrats and Republicans, holding the majority of the power. But now, those plates, they're starting to shift. You have this rising populist sentiment fueled by economic anxiety and distrust of the elites, and it's challenging those traditional party lines. If the GOP doesn't adapt to this changing landscape, they risk being left behind.
So you're saying we could see a third-party movement, or maybe even a splintering of the existing two-party system?
It's definitely a possibility. Think about it. You have figures like DeSantis on the right, who appeal to a more populist nationalist base. And on the left, you have these progressive voices pushing for more radical change. If the two major parties don't address these concerns, they could very well find themselves losing ground to these alternative movements.
So it's like the political center is shrinking and the extremes are gaining power.
That's one way to put it. And it creates this really volatile, unpredictable political environment. Just think back to a year ago. Who could have predicted that we'd be talking about Elon Musk's role in the government and town hall meetings turning into, well, shouting matches?
It's been a wild ride, for sure. But I think it speaks to this larger trend of disillusionment with the status quo. People are looking for something different, something new. They're looking for leaders who they believe will actually represent them, who will listen to their concerns.
And they're not afraid to make their voices heard, even if it means yelling at their elected officials or protesting in the streets. This backlash we're seeing, it's a sign that people are engaged, they're paying attention, and they're not going to sit quietly while they feel ignored.
It's a reminder that democracy, it can be messy, it can be noisy, but it's vital. And in the end, it's up to us, the people, to decide what direction we want our country to go in.
Well said. And I think that's the key takeaway here. We're living in a time of massive change and uncertainty. The political landscape is changing. The old rules, they don't apply anymore. It's a time for critical thinking, for questioning everything, for being open to new possibilities.
I like that. Because if there's one thing we've learned from this deep dive, it's that the future, well, it's anything but predictable. And that can be a little exciting and a little scary all at the same time.
You got that right. But hey, that's what makes it all so interesting, right?
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought, something to ponder. What does all of this mean for the balance of power? Will we see Congress step up and reassert its authority, or will the executive branch continue to push the boundaries? And what about figures like Elon Musk? What role will they play in shaping the future of government? These are questions we'll continue to explore here on The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep diving deep. And don't forget those critical thinking caps. Okay, so we're back, and it's the final stretch of our deep dive into this whole GOP backlash thing. After all this talk about town halls and budget cuts and Elon Musk, I think it's time to zoom out a little, look at the big picture. What does this all mean for the future of, well, American politics? Is this just a temporary blip, or are we seeing something bigger, a real shift happening?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to really answer it, well, we got to consider a few things. First, there's this growing gap, right, between the GOP establishment, the folks in charge, and their base, the voters. It's not just about, disagreeing on policy. It's deeper than that. It's a difference in values, There's this feeling among some voters that the party's lost its way, that they're not focused on the needs of everyday people anymore.
Yeah, it's like they're more concerned with, corporations and the wealthy elite than they are with the average Joe.
Exactly. And that feeling, it's not limited to Republicans either. We're seeing it across the political spectrum, this frustration, this sense that the system's rigged, and it's rigged against the average person.
It's like no matter how hard you work, how much you try, you're always just one step away from falling behind, from things going wrong.
Right, and then you see these huge tax cuts for corporations, for the wealthy, while programs that actually help working families, well, those are the ones getting slashed. It's a recipe for people to feel angry, to feel like they're not being heard.
And that brings us to the second thing we need to consider. This whole idea of a third-party movement, or at least some kind of splintering of the current two-party system.
It's definitely a possibility. I mean, think about it. You've got figures like DeSantis on the right, appealing to a more populist, nationalist base. And then on the left, you've got those progressive voices pushing for more radical change. If the Democrats and Republicans don't address these concerns, these needs, they might find themselves losing voters to these new movements, these alternative options.
So it's like the middle ground is shrinking and the extremes are becoming more and more powerful.
Yeah, you could say that. And it makes the whole political landscape, pretty volatile, pretty unpredictable. Think about it. A year ago, who would have predicted, really predicted, that we'd be talking about Elon Musk running parts of the government and town hall meetings turning into, basically shouting matches?
It's been a wild ride, no doubt. But I think it shows just how disillusioned people are with the way things are, with the status quo. They're looking for something different, someone they believe will actually fight for them, for their interests.
And they're not afraid to make their voices heard. They'll let you know if they're not happy, whether it's, yelling at their representatives or taking to the streets in protest. This backlash, all this anger, It's a sign that people are paying attention, they're engaged, and they're not going to be ignored.
Yeah, it's like a wake-up call, you know, a reminder that this whole democracy thing, it's messy, it's loud, but it's important.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's up to us, the people, to decide where we go from here, what direction we want for our country.
Well said. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. We're living in a time of, well, just massive change, tons of uncertainty. The political landscape is in flux, and the old rules, those don't apply anymore.
Yeah.
This is a time to think critically, to question everything, and to be open to new ideas, new possibilities.
I like that. Because if there's one thing this whole deep dive has shown us, it's that the future, well, it's unpredictable. And that can be, well, both exciting and kind of scary all at the same time.
Absolutely. But hey, that's what keeps things interesting.
Oh, you said it. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought. What does all this mean for the balance of power? Will we see Congress step up, take charge, or will the executive branch keep pushing the limits? And what about people like Elon Musk? What role will they play in shaping the future of government? These are all questions we'll keep exploring here on The Deep Dive. So until next time, keep diving deep, keep those brains working, and we'll see you soon.